Here are our course objectives for Lesson 1.8. We're going to learn to estimate results and keep those estimates in context. We're also going to make sure that we can determine when an estimate has an error and when an estimate is reasonable. Then we're going to look at some real-world problems and decide how to reason about them using a variety of strategies and types of numbers. So the key here is we're going to have certain benchmarks. Benchmarks are going to be percentages like a 1%, 10%, quarters, thirds, halves, 2/3, 3/4. So basically tens, quarters, halves, things like that. And then we'll do some translation of things. Finally, because we're going to have a lot of estimation, we're going to have estimated guesses. So some of our guesses might be different, but they can still be good guesses. All right, so let's look at the problem statement here. In this course, you'll make estimations and explain the strategies you use to generate estimations. There is not one best strategy, and I really want to emphasize that in this video. What I hope to do is show you a few strategies, but there is not one best strategy. And so just make sure that you're hearing the different strategies and you are considering a couple of strategies that maybe are unfamiliar to you. Use estimation to answer the following questions. Try to make your estimation calculations mentally, right? Write down your work if you need to, but do not use a calculator. So that is your challenge. It is about using some of these frames to help us estimate. So let's look at question 1. Question 1 says, which of the following are reasonable ways to estimate 2% of 150 people? Oops, sorry. There may be more than one reasonable answer. So I told you this in class. Before I even look at the responses, I think about it for myself because I don't want to get distracted by the responses. So I'm truly not even looking at them. And I'm just going to focus on 2% of 150 people. So here's one estimate. I know that 1% of 150 people would move the decimal 2 places to the left. So 1% of 150 people is 1.5. 2% is double. And when I think about doubling 1.5, I think about money, I think about $1.50, I think about 3. So that is my one way of thinking about the problem. Another way someone might think about this problem is you might think about 10%. So 10% of 150 is the decimal will move 1 place, so that's 15. And then when you think about 15, this is where you have to know a little bit more math. 2% is 1/5 of 10% because 2 is 1/5 of 10. So take your 15 and you can either think of 1/5 of 15, or you can think about breaking up 15 into 5 groups. 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. 15 is 5 groups of 3, and so 1/5 of that would just be the one number here, which is 3. Now, how do I know 15 is 5 equal groups of 3? Because I know 15 is 3 times 5. And so that's 5 groups of 3. So, similarly, 2 times 5 is 10, and that's how I know that 2 is 1/5. Like, these are a couple of ways I might initially think about this problem. So now that I have a couple of ways thought through, I'm going to come look at these answers and then think about them and then consider. There may be more than one correct answer, so we're going to select all the best answers. 2% is 2 out of 10. This is already false. So that can't be correct because that's false. 2 out of 10 is 20%. So it's not that one. 2 out of 10 is 20%. And that's a mistake. All right. 2% is 2 out of 100. That's true. So out of 150 people, that would be 3 people. That's another way to think about it. 2% is 2 out of 100. Let's really talk about that one. You have 100 and then you need 2. So you add 50 more, you add 1 more person, right? So every 50 people, you get an additional 1. And that's a way that you can get a total of 3 when you have a total of 150. So this one is correct. 20% is 1/5. Okay, that's true. 1/5 of 150 is 30. That's true. 150 divided by 5 is 30. 2% is 1/10 of 20%. That's true. So 1/10, this is not said, so 3 people, this comes from 1/10 of 30, and that's true. And so this is also a true answer. So notice, what is my strategy? I've thought about the question for myself, and so now what I'm doing is I'm going through and I'm pausing each claim and I'm determining if that statement is true or false. I'm pausing at either commas or periods and just evaluating that portion of the statement. 1% of 150 is 1.5. That's true. That was actually my first way of thinking of it. 2 times that is 3. There it is. That's my first idea. Multiply 2 by 150 to get 300 people. That's not true. So this is false. Like, the statement is true, but that's not equivalent to 2%. So that's not true. All right, very good. Let's go to question 2. Which of the following are reasonable ways to estimate 15% of $29.95? Okay. So the first thing, when I think of $29.95, I just go ahead and think about $30. So I want 15% of $30. Well, I know that 10% of $30 is $3. And then 5% is half. So that's going to be $1.50. Put them together, that's 15%. Therefore, we get $4.50. All right, that's one way I would think about this question. Now, I know the actual answer is going to be slightly less, but we're estimating. I don't know that I would have done this any other way initially, so let's just go ahead and look at the options and then kind of work through them. 30% is 3 out of 10. That's true. 3 out of 10. So that would be 9 out of 30. That's actually really interesting, because if we have 3 to 10 and you need to get 30, you're going to have to do that 3 times. This total is 30. This total is 9. So that is true. Since we want 15%, which is half of 30, half of 9 is 4.5. That's actually true, and that's actually a nice way to think about it. Thinking about portions of 10. That one is true. 0.515 times 29.95 is this. This is true, but this is not an estimation. That's actually how you would find the exact answer. So that's not one, because it told us to estimate, and this is where you want to follow instructions. 15 times 30 is 450. Adjusting the decimal place gives 45. This is actually a really cool method and could work if it had been done correctly. You see, 15% is 0.15, so you would need to adjust the decimal place 2 times. And so that 450, you would have needed to move it 2 times and it would have worked. But they only adjusted it 1 time, which is incorrect. And so that's why this one is incorrect. But that could have been a really cool way to do it, to think of 15% as just 15 and then later divide by 100 or just the decimal. 15 times 30 is 450. That's true, but that's not finishing the work. Okay, this is, that's true, but this is false. They only adjusted 1 time. This is true, but it doesn't help us estimate. And then 10% of 30 is 3, half of that, and this is the one that I do naturally. So that is also a correct estimation. Let's look at question 3. describe two quick ways to find approximately 33% of 59 books. Okay, this is how I would do it. So the thing you have to know about 33% is approximately 1/3. So that means dividing something into 3 equal groups. I will round 59 to 60 because I know that 60 can be split into 3 equal groups of 20, 20, and 20, right? Adding. Therefore, 1/3 is 20, and that's one method for finding out the result. I'll leave it to you to figure out a second method that you would do. Okay, let's look at question 4. Estimate 25% of 98.50. 25% is a quarter, rounds to $100. 1/4 of $100 is $25. I mean, that is so familiar to us, I don't even think we need to go any further. All right, let's look at number 5. Estimate 0.5% of $14.95. I'm going to round $14.95 to $15, and this is half of a percent. So what is 1% of 15? That will move the decimal 2 places, right? So that's 0.15. Or if you needed to start at 10%, you could have started there. 10% of 15 is 1.5. So you just, if you needed to get there, but we eventually need to get here. And then now what I need to do is I need half of that. So half of 15 is 0.075. And so this will be my estimate for the answer, half of 1%. When I think about 15, I think about 750, and that's how I just, continue to move it down. All right. For the next set, here are the instructions. Convert the following fractions to percents using estimation when appropriate. 5 out of 25. So this is a fraction. Remember, the order matters, so it's 5 out of 25. There's a couple ways to think of it. I'll do it twice. One way is that this reduces, for those who know how to reduce, this is 1/5. And 1/5, if you know, is 20%. Here's another way to do this. 5 out of 25. If you take the number 25, you would have 5 groups of 5. And 1/5 of those, 5 out of that is 1/5. And that would be this representation here. Actually, let me do it this other way. That's actually doing it the same way. Here's another way. 5 out of 25. If you think of it out of 100, proportionally, multiply by 4, this is 20. 20 out of 100 is 20%. So that's another way you could do the problem. All right. 20 out of 80. You can cancel out those zeros. We've done that a couple of times previously. So this is 2 out of 8. And 2 out of 8. Here's your 8. 8. 2, 4, 6, 8. And if you only want 2 out of 8, you're getting 1/4. And 1/4 is 25%. So that's one way to do the problem. You can also, again, reduce this, and you'll see that 1/4, again, 25%. If you see that 1/4 and you're not sure, you can multiply by 25, and you'll see 25 out of 100, again, 25%. For this one, 3 out of 298. All right. Now, this is how I'm thinking of this one. 298 is about 300. So 3 out of 300, that 3 and that 3, oh, this is easy work. I move the decimal over once, that's 10%. I move the decimal over twice, that's 100%. This is so this is 3%. So this is about 3%. Finally, we have 1 out of 1,000. And one way I can do this is because I have the 1,000, I can just move one decimal over to make it 100, but I do the same thing here, moving one decimal over. So this will be 0.1 out of 100 or 0.1%. So those are the ways that I would estimate those values. A variety of ways, there's some similarity, but what they're relying on are facts like you knowing how to find 1% or 10% or thinking about quarters or thirds or things like that. All right, finally, estimations will help you make calculations quickly in daily situations. So here's a daily situation that we have, and then we're going to analyze in question 10. Question 10 says, you're shopping for a coat and you find one that is on sale. The coat's regular price is $87.99. Which of the following are reasonable ways to estimate the sale price if the coats are on sale for 25% off? There may be more than one reasonable method. So $87.99 and 25% off. So let's start off. First of all, I'm going to round this to $88, which is great because 25% is a quarter. That's 1/4, right? And 88 is a great number because it splits into 4 equal parts of 22. So 25% off is to subtract 22. So that's one way of doing the work. That one happens to be this last one. So we'll go ahead and check it off here. This one is no, because it's true, but it's not an estimation, okay? Here's another way that we can think of this. I can round this to a nice number. I can round this to $90. 10% of 90 is 9. Half or 5% of 90 then is half of that, which is 4.5. So 25%, which is a quarter, I need to use a 9, a 9, and a 4.5. Add those together. That's going to be 18, about 22.50, and that's how much I'm going to subtract. So that is similar to this option. Let's see. Round to $90, 10%, that works. 10% of 90 is 9. 25% is 2 times that, and so 2.5 is about 22, yep, and then subtract 22 to get 68. Yes, that works. What 25% is 1/4 of, I skipped this one, sorry, because I saw another one that looked like what we did. 25% is 1/4, so round 1/4 of 88 is 22. Oh, but doesn't finish because we're estimating the sale price. So this one doesn't finish, even though these 3 things are true. 25% is half of 50. That's true. Half of 88 is 44. That's true. Half again is 22. That's true. That's actually a creative way to do it. And then this last one we need to check is the sale price after discount is 75% of the original or 3/4. That's true. Round to 88. 1/4 of 88 is 22. 3 times 22 is 66. That is true. It's using the remaining 3/4 to get to the answer. For question 11, we want to know 70% off. Usually when the percent off is really large like this, that's when I really lean into looking at the complement. So if it's 70% off, that means 30% remains. So I could round this to 90, and then 30% of 90, 10% of 90 is 9, and then multiply that by 3, 27. So that would be approximate estimate of the price of the coat. There are other estimates you can do as well. And this next problem, and I think this is there's 2 more, okay. Shows how estimates of percentages can be used to make comparisons among groups of different sizes. A law enforcement officer reviews the following data from 2 precincts. She makes a quick estimate to answer the following question. If a violent incident occurs, in which precinct is it more likely to involve a weapon? So in this table, we have 2 precincts. Row 1 is precinct 1. Row 2 is precinct 2. We have the total number of violent incidents in the first column, and then we have the subset of violent incidents that involve a weapon in the second column. So we're going to estimate the percent of violent incidents. Well, for precinct 1, that means 5 out of 25, which is 1/5, and that's 20%. Now for precinct 2, I've got 122 and I've got 18. So I actually would round that in the following way. I would consider, sorry about that, I would consider 20 out of 120. Cross out those zeros. That's 2 out of 12, which is 1 out of 6. And 1 out of 6 is approximately, now this might depend on how much you know. This is approximately 17%. It's smaller than 1/5 because 6 is bigger. So this is an approximation. So even though it's more likely that a violent incident involves a weapon in precinct 1, even though overall there's less violence, a higher percentage of those violent incidents involve a weapon. Okay. Being able to calculate with percentages is also important. An estimate of the sale price will help you decide whether to buy the coat. However, the store owner needs to make the exact calculation to know how much to charge. An estimate helps an officer get a sense of the situation, but if she is writing the report, she'll want the exact figures. So now what we're going to do is we're going to calculate the exact answers, and we can use our calculator. So I'm going to get my calculator up and ready. Give me one moment. And now we will calculate these answers. Okay, 25% off. This is what we're going to compute for the sale price. So this is how I would do it. I would do 87.99. We want 25% off. So that's going to multiply by 1 minus 0.25, and that will give you your total after sale price. And we're rounding to the nearest cent. So this is $65.99. For the next example, it's 75% off. So we're going to have $87.99 times 1 minus 0.7. And that's going to be 40, because the 0.397 rounds up to 40, right? So for this next one, we're going to calculate the percent exactly, and we're going to round to 1 decimal place. Precinct 1, 5 divided by 25, that was still exactly 0.2, so that's 20%. And then for precinct 2, we're going to have 18 divided by 122, and that is times 100, and that is 14.8%. And that gets you through lesson 1.8. Thank you for listening, and I hope that this was helpful.